That night, the courtroom in downtown Los Angeles felt unnaturally cold. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly above the crowd of tense faces, faces of people who had waited years for this day. At the center of it all sat Kelly Pack, her expression unreadable, her hands folded neatly on the defense table as if she were simply attending a business meeting. But everyone in that room knew this was no ordinary hearing. The murder of Juliana Reading had haunted California for years, a chilling mystery wrapped in betrayal, power, and silence. When detectives first matched Kelly Pack's DNA to the samples collected inside Juliana's bungalow, the case that had seemed destined to fade into obscurity suddenly roared back to life. The forensic results were devastatingly clear. Pack's DNA had been found on the victim's clothing, on the locks of her door, and most damning of all, on Juliana's throat. The discovery stunned even the most seasoned investigators. It was as if, after years of confusion and false leads, the ghost of Juliana herself had finally reached out from the shadows to point to her killer. From that moment on, prosecutors built their case with relentless precision. They believed Pack had not acted alone. She was, they claimed, a weapon, an enforcer, sent to carry out a vengeful order from the one man who had both the motive and the means to destroy Juliana. Dr. Munir, the wealthy, charismatic physician who had once been part of Juliana's life. But Munir was gone, thousands of miles away in Lebanon, where American law could not touch him. That left Pack alone in the dock, facing the fury of the law and the grief of Juliana's family. As the trial opened, the lead prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Elena Rhodes, stepped before the jury. Her voice was steady, but each word carried weight. Juliana Reading's life was stolen by someone who knew exactly what they were doing, she said. Someone who entered her home with a purpose, and left only when they were sure she would never breathe again. The evidence will show that person was Kelly Pack. The courtroom was silent except for the soft scratch of pens and the faint hum of cameras outside the door. Reporters filled every seat, eager to document what had already become one of the most sensational murder trials of the decade. Rhodes walked toward a display board showing enlarged crime scene photos. The images were stark: Juliana's cozy bungalow, her overturned furniture, the faint outline of her handprint on the floor where she had struggled for her life. The DNA doesn't lie, Rhodes continued, her tone cold and deliberate. It places the defendant not just at the scene, but at the very center of this crime. Her genetic material was found on Juliana's throat, where the strangulation occurred. That is not coincidence. That is not contamination. That is contact. Violent, deadly contact. She let the words linger. Across the room, Juliana's mother, Patricia Reading, sat trembling, her fingers locked around a folded tissue. For her, this moment was a mixture of hope and agony. For years she had prayed for justice, and now it was finally within reach, if only the jury believed. The defense, led by veteran attorney Mark Alden, had a very different story to tell. His client, he claimed, was being framed, used as a scapegoat, to fill the void left by the man who had escaped justice. Ladies and gentlemen, Alden said when his turn came, pacing slowly before the jury box. This case is not about what the evidence says. It's about what the evidence seems to say. DNA, as powerful as it sounds, is not infallible. It can transfer. It can contaminate. It can deceive. He turned to the jury, his eyes glinting beneath the fluorescent lights. The prosecution will tell you that Ms. Pack's DNA was found on the victim. They will show you photographs and charts. But what they will not prove is how that DNA got there. They can't. Because my client wasn't there that night. Her life was being lived somewhere else entirely. And with that, the battle began. Science versus speculation, evidence versus illusion, guilt versus doubt. The trial unfolded over months, Every day, new witnesses took the stand. Some were experts, forensic specialists, pathologists, detectives, while others were fragments of Juliana's world, her friends, co-workers, and heartbroken family. Each voice added another thread to the web of truth and deceit. When the prosecution called Detective Laura Chen the lead investigator, the jury leaned in. Chen's testimony was meticulous, methodical. She described how the crime scene had been preserved, how samples were collected, and how each piece of DNA was analyzed independently to avoid contamination. "We were extremely careful," she said. "Every sample was double-tested in separate labs. The results matched perfectly. The defendant's DNA was found in multiple locations, including on the victim's neck and under her fingernails." "In your professional opinion," Rhodes asked, "could that DNA have appeared there through accidental transfer?" "No," Chen said firmly. "The pattern of DNA distribution tells a story of physical struggle. There was direct contact between the two women." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Pak remained still, her expression unreadable, but a faint tightening of her jaw betrayed her frustration. Alden rose for cross-examination, adjusting his tie with exaggerated calm. "Detective Chen," he began, "are you aware of the phenomenon known as secondary DNA transfer?" "Yes," she replied cautiously. "Then you also know that DNA can be moved from one person to another through shared objects, say a towel or a piece of clothing?" "That's theoretically possible, yes." Alden nodded, walking slowly back to his table. "So it's possible," he said, turning toward the jury, "that my client's DNA was moved to that scene without her ever stepping foot inside." It was the defense's cornerstone argument, a delicate but powerful narrative of scientific doubt. Outside the courthouse, the media devoured every word. News outlets debated endlessly whether Pak was a cold-blooded killer or a convenient scapegoat. Talk shows, podcasts, and YouTube analysts dissected every detail of the case. The phrase secondary DNA transfer became a viral headline overnight. Inside the courtroom, however, the truth was buried under layers of strategy. Rhodes countered every defense point with methodical force. "This isn't a lab experiment," she told the jury. "This is real life. The defendant's DNA wasn't found in one place. It was found everywhere. On the door, on the victim's throat, even on a dish in the sink. That's not transfer. That's presence." The jury scribbled notes, glancing uneasily at the defendant. Then came the testimony that changed the tone of the trial entirely. A forensic biologist named Dr. Rena Morales was brought to the stand to explain the significance of the DNA found under Juliana's fingernails. "When a person is attacked," Morales explained, "they often scratch or grab their assailant in self-defense. In those moments, skin cells, blood, or sweat can be trapped beneath the nails. It's some of the most reliable forensic evidence we can recover." "And what did you find under Juliana's nails?" Rhodes asked. "A perfect genetic match to the defendant, Kelly Pak." The courtroom fell silent. Even the reporters stopped typing. Alden rose again, but this time his confidence seemed thinner. "Doctor," he said, "could those cells have been transferred indirectly?" Morales met his gaze calmly. "Not in this case. The samples were consistent with direct physical struggle. The presence of skin tissue fragments means the victim scratched her attacker during the assault." Every word struck like a hammer. Patricia buried her face in her hands as tears slipped down her cheeks, but the defense refused to yield. Alden shifted tactics, painting Pak as a pawn, a woman manipulated by a powerful man she once trusted. "Munir," he told the jury, "was a man of influence, money, and secrets. He used people. He controlled them. If my client was involved in his business, it was as a professional, never as a killer. The payments she received were legitimate. The rest is the prosecution's fantasy." Yet the prosecution had anticipated this. They unveiled evidence that suggested a more sinister arrangement between Munir and Pak. large wire transfers totaling nearly $1 million, phone records showing dozens of late-night calls, and, most disturbingly, a trail of threats directed at people who had crossed Munir before. One witness, a former employee of Munir's clinic, testified that Pak had once shown up at her home after she complained about unpaid wages. She told me, the woman recalled, her voice shaking, that it would be a shame if I ever went missing like that actress from Santa Monica. The jury murmured. The implication was unmistakable. As the trial pressed on, the psychological tension deepened. Reporters began calling it the case of two ghosts, Juliana, the ghost of a dreamer whose life ended too soon, and Munir, the ghost of a man who had vanished beyond reach. Pak, however, was no ghost. She was flesh and blood, sitting in the courtroom each day as the evidence stacked higher against her. She flinched when photos were shown, bristled when witnesses described her as intimidating, and avoided eye contact with the Reading family at all costs. Still, her lawyer clung to the one thing that could save her: reasonable doubt. He reminded the jury, again and again, that no one had seen Pak enter Juliana's home, that no murder weapon was recovered, and that the supposed mastermind, Munir, was never questioned. By the time the defense rested, the jury was visibly exhausted. The trial had stretched over months, its emotional toll heavy on everyone involved. When closing arguments began, Elena Rhodes stepped forward one last time, her tone no longer fiery, but solemn. "This isn't just about science," she said softly. "It's about humanity." A young woman fought for her life in her own home. She scratched, she struggled, she gasped for air, and in those desperate moments, she left behind the truth. Her attacker tried to silence her, but Juliana's body spoke louder than any witness ever could. She paused, turning toward the defendant. "And now, that truth is in your hands." The jury stared down at their notes, the weight of her words pressing into the room like gravity. Across the aisle, Alden rose for his final plea. "We cannot convict a person on fear," he said. "We cannot replace evidence with emotion. If you believe, even for a second, that there's another explanation, another path that fits these facts, you must find my client not guilty. That is your duty." The courtroom fell into silence once more. Even the air seemed to hold its breath, and as the judge dismissed the jury to deliberate, Patricia Reading whispered a silent prayer under her breath. "Please," she mouthed, "let her soul rest." Outside, storm clouds gathered over Los Angeles. The sky turned gray, and rain began to fall softly against the courthouse windows, as if the city itself was mourning. The courtroom door shut behind the 12 jurors with a dull metallic click, and the sound seemed to echo through every heart left waiting inside. For the first time in months, there were no arguments, no objections, no photographs projected onto the wall, only the low hum of the air conditioner and the relentless tick of the courtroom clock. Patricia Reading sat motionless, her eyes fixed on the empty jury box as though she could will the verdict to appear there. She had watched every second of testimony, every tear, every piece of evidence that carried her daughter's name, and now she could do nothing but wait. Across the aisle, Kelly Pak exhaled slowly and folded her hands in her lap. She looked calm, too calm, some whispered, but beneath the table, one foot tapped a steady, nervous rhythm. Her attorney leaned toward her and murmured something inaudible, but she didn't respond. For the first time, the mask of indifference cracked ever so slightly. Her eyes darted to the clock and back again. Outside, the media storm raged. Reporters crowded the steps of the courthouse, shouting into microphones as rainwater slicked the marble beneath them. "Will justice finally be served for Juliana Reading?" one asked. "Or will the system fail her again?" The question floated into the gray afternoon air like smoke. Inside, the hours dragged. The judge had left the bench. Lawyers paced quietly. Bailiffs whispered near the back doors. The jury's absence felt like a hole in the center of the world. Every so often the courtroom door creaked open, only a clerk bringing water or paperwork, and each time Patricia's heart leapt, then fell again. After 5 hours, word arrived the jury had reached a verdict. The clerk's announcement sliced through the silence, and suddenly the room came alive. Spectators shuffled back to their seats. Reporters scribbled frantic notes, and camera shutters clicked like mechanical heartbeats. Patricia clasped her husband's hand so tightly that her knuckles whitened. When the 12 jurors filed back in, they carried no expression at all. Each one avoided eye contact with the defendant, as if afraid of what they might reveal. The foreperson, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, held a folded paper in both hands. He looked as though he had aged 10 years in a day. The judge cleared his throat. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" The foreperson nodded. "We have, Your Honor." He passed the slip of paper to the bailiff, who delivered it to the judge. The entire room froze as the judge unfolded it, scanning the words that would decide the rest of Kelly Pack's life. Then he read aloud, voice steady but almost reluctant. "In the matter of the People versus Kelly Pack, we, the jury, find the defendant not guilty of second-degree murder. For a heartbeat, no one moved." The words hung there, impossible, unreal. Then the room erupted, shouts, gasps, sobs, the scrape of chairs against tile. Patricia's cry cut through the chaos. "No, no, this can't be." Her husband pulled her close, but she trembled violently, shaking her head again and again. Across the aisle, Pack pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. Her attorney whispered, "It's over." She nodded once, slowly, as if she couldn't quite believe it either. The judge called for order, but the outcry only swelled. The bailiffs guided Pack toward the side door as Patricia's voice echoed after her. "You killed her. You know what you did?" Cameras flashed like lightning, capturing the moment forever. A grieving mother reaching out toward the woman who had just walked free. Outside, the news exploded within minutes. Pack acquitted in Reading murder. Justice denied again. Commentators debated live on air while the courthouse steps became a sea of microphones and umbrellas. Some shouted that the jury had been fooled by science they didn't understand. Others claimed there was never enough proof to convict. Either way, the verdict split the city in half. For Patricia, it was as though the world had ended twice. Once when she lost Juliana, and now again when she lost faith in justice. That night, she sat alone in her hotel room staring at the framed photo she always carried, Juliana on her 21st birthday, laughing beneath strings of fairy lights. The sound of that laughter filled her mind until it became unbearable. She pressed the picture to her chest and whispered, "I'm sorry, baby." I tried. Across town, Kelly Pack slipped into the back seat of a waiting car. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets gleaming under neon reflections. Reporters called her name, flashes bursting against the tinted windows, but she didn't look back. The driver pulled away, and the courthouse receded into darkness. Inside the car, Pack finally spoke. "Tell them I need my passport." Her lawyer hesitated. "Kelly, don't do anything stupid. Just get it," she said, voice flat. "I'm done with this city." Meanwhile, prosecutors packed away their files in silence. Elena Rhodes sat at her desk long after midnight, staring at the caseboard where Juliana's smiling face still hung among evidence photos. She had poured years of her life into those 2 words, guilty beyond doubt, and still the system had slipped between her fingers. When she finally stood, she whispered to no one, "I hope she knows we tried." News coverage didn't fade. It mutated. In the weeks after the verdict, television networks replayed the trial footage on endless loop. Opinion pieces questioned everything, from forensic science to jury education. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse holding candles and posters that read "Justice for Juliana." Others, fewer but louder, argued that the verdict proved the system worked, that emotion could not replace evidence. Yet deep down, most people felt something colder, that the truth had slipped away again, hiding behind money, distance, and power. Investigators continued to track Munir's trail. International notices were issued, but they knew it was futile. Lebanon had no extradition treaty with the United States, and Munir's wealth insulated him further. He had vanished like smoke. All that remained were his old business ties, and one woman who had taken the fall and walked free. For the Reading family, grief became a second existence. Patricia rarely left the house. Her husband Greg threw himself into work. Their son Patrick moved back home, trying to fill the emptiness that echoed through every room. Juliana's dog, once a bundle of energy, now lay silently beside Patricia's easel whenever she painted. Painting became Patricia's only refuge. In soft strokes of color, she rebuilt her daughter's world. The beach at Santa Monica, the boutique Juliana once dreamed of owning, the smile that had brightened every room. Sometimes, when the light hit just right, she swore she could feel Juliana standing behind her, watching. Meanwhile, whispers about Kelly Pack's new life began to surface. She had left Los Angeles within days of the verdict, reportedly moving to Europe. Some said Germany, others Switzerland. Rumors claimed she was still in contact with Munir, that the two had rekindled their partnership in a different line of business. None of it could be proven, but the stories persisted like ghosts. 2 years later, headlines would confirm what many feared. Munir arrested in Germany on charges of medical fraud. The accusations were grotesque: unqualified assistants performing surgeries, patients left disfigured, insurance companies defrauded of millions. Among those charged, Kelly Pack. To Patricia, the news was both vindication and fresh pain. She clipped every article, highlighting the names, the dates, the echoes of deception. "See," she told Greg quietly one morning. "They did it again. They hurt people again." Greg nodded, but his eyes were tired. "And they'll slip away again, too," he said. He was right. Within months, Munir was released and returned to Lebanon. Pack posted bond, $1.5 million, and disappeared before her next hearing. It was as if the universe itself refused to hold them accountable. Years passed, but the name Juliana Reading never vanished from the public memory. True crime forums dissected the case. Documentarians sought interviews. Online sleuths mapped every known connection between Pack and Munir. Each new discovery only deepened the sense of injustice. In Tucson, Patricia transformed Juliana's old bedroom into a studio filled with canvases and light. She painted at dawn when the world was quietest, the smell of coffee mingling with linseed oil. "This is how I talk to her now," she once said to a journalist who visited for an anniversary feature. "Every brushstroke is a conversation." The article went viral. Thousands of readers wrote messages of sympathy, promising never to forget Juliana's name. A foundation was later established in her memory, offering support to families navigating unsolved or unresolved homicide cases. Patricia attended the opening ceremony wearing one of Juliana's old silver bracelets. It glimmered in the sunlight like a promise. Back in Lebanon, Munir continued to live comfortably. Photographs occasionally surfaced, him dining with relatives, attending weddings, smiling for cameras. In every image there was no hint of remorse, no shadow of consequence. Officially, he remained a respected physician. Unofficially, he was the man who had escaped a ghost. As for Kelly Pack, sightings became rarer each year. Some claimed she changed her name and opened a cosmetic clinic. Others swore she vanished into South America. Interpol notices went unanswered. The trail faded again. And yet, whenever a journalist revisited the story, one detail always returned: the DNA on Juliana's throat. It remained the silent testimony no verdict could erase. Science didn't forget, even when people did. The years that followed blurred together for Patricia. Dates no longer mattered. Everything was measured in distance. The distance from the last time she heard Juliana's laugh. The distance from the courthouse steps where truth had slipped away. Yet, despite the exhaustion, she never allowed her daughter's name to fade into the background noise of forgotten tragedies. Each morning she rose before sunrise, brewed a single cup of coffee, and stood before the canvas. The ritual was almost sacred. The rhythmic motion of the brush calmed her heartbeat. The colors, often shades of gold and blue, became her language of survival. In those quiet hours she would whisper, "Good morning, my girl," and begin again. Reporters who visited described her paintings as haunting. Women standing on shorelines, faces half-lit by dawn, gazing toward an invisible horizon. When asked what they meant, Patricia simply smiled. "They're all Juliana," she said. Different moments of her, still alive somewhere. Greg kept his grief inside. He returned to his pharmacy, filling prescriptions and listening to the small, ordinary complaints of customers. Sometimes he'd stare at the bottles lined on the shelves, all those cures for pain, and wonder why none of them worked for the heart. At night he would sit beside Patricia while she painted, silently guarding her world of color as if protecting a fragile flame. Patrick, their son, grew into a quiet advocate. He studied criminal justice, determined to understand the system that had failed them. On the day he graduated, he laid his diploma beside Juliana's photograph. "For you," he whispered. The foundation created in Juliana's name began to expand. It funded forensic science scholarships, supported families through the labyrinth of court proceedings, and lobbied for reforms in evidence-handling laws. Each success was a small rebellion against the silence that had once surrounded their case. While the Reading family rebuilt themselves piece by piece, Munir continued to carve a path of deceit across continents. European investigators traced a pattern of clinics registered under shell corporations, all linked to his network. Patients complained of vanished records, falsified procedures, and empty promises. In 2015, German authorities finally cornered him. The arrest made headlines across Europe. Renowned Lebanese surgeon accused of massive medical fraud. But the world had grown cynical. People had seen this story before. They watched, half expecting another escape. They were right. For several months, Munir sat in a sleek detention facility near Frankfurt, surrounded by lawyers and translators. When questioned about Juliana's death, he smiled politely. "I was never charged," he said. "America invented that story." He spoke with the composure of a man rehearsed in lies. Kelly Pack's name reemerged soon after. Investigators found that she had helped manage Munir's finances, signing documents under an alias. When confronted, she denied everything, claiming she was merely an accountant. Yet her signature appeared on dozens of fraudulent claims worth millions. Both were indicted for conspiracy, patient deception, and insurance fraud. The case was monumental, $150 million in damages, hundreds of victims. But before the trial could begin, Pack posted bond and vanished once more. The world barely blinked this time. It was as though she'd become a ghost written into the margins of crime history. Munir, meanwhile, exploited every legal loophole until he, too, was quietly released. He returned to Lebanon under the pretense of health reasons. Official statements framed his departure as temporary. It wasn't. Within weeks, he was spotted dining along the Beirut waterfront, dressed in immaculate white, the sea breeze ruffling his hair like a man untouched by consequence. In Los Angeles, the Reading family received the news through an email from a journalist. Patricia read it 3 times before setting the phone down. "He's free again," she said quietly. Greg didn't answer. There were no new tears left. That evening she went into Juliana's old room, her studio now, and began a new painting. This time she chose darker tones, charcoal, indigo, crimson, colors that swallowed the light instead of reflecting it. When she finished, the canvas showed a figure standing at the edge of an ocean beneath a storm. Lightning struck the water, and behind the clouds a faint shimmer of gold broke through. Patricia titled it "Still Here." The painting would later hang in a local gallery, drawing hundreds of visitors who knew nothing of the case but felt the ache in every brushstroke. Some left notes beside it. For all who never got justice. For every mother still waiting. Elena Rhodes, now retired from the district attorney's office, visited one afternoon. She stood silently before the canvas for a long time. When Patricia finally joined her, Rhodes whispered, "I still replay that trial in my head. Every word. I wish we could have done more." Patricia placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You did what you could. It's the system that failed, not you." Rhodes nodded, eyes glistening. "Then we'll keep fixing it, one case at a time." And so the story lived on, not as a closed file in an archive, but as a constant reminder of what justice sometimes forgets, that behind every exhibit, every fingerprint, every line of DNA, there is a heartbeat that once existed. Years later, a new generation of viewers would discover Juliana's story online. True crime enthusiasts, journalists, and ordinary people stumbled upon documentaries, forums, and podcasts retelling her final days. Most began the same way. In 2008, a young actress named Juliana Reading was found murdered in her Santa Monica home. What followed was one of the most haunting trials in modern California history. Somewhere in those retellings, amid the analysis and speculation, a deeper message emerged, a warning about manipulation, power, and the fragility of truth. Listeners heard not only about the tragedy, but also about resilience, a family that refused to forget, a mother who turned grief into art, and a justice system still learning how to listen. The camera would fade from Juliana's photograph to Patricia's painting, the storm, the lightning, the shimmer of gold, while the narrator's voice lowered into a final reflection. Juliana's case reminds us that truth doesn't die just because a verdict says otherwise. It lingers, in memories, in brushstrokes, in the quiet spaces where justice still whispers. Then, as the music softened and the screen dimmed to black, the familiar sign-off would return, the same words that closed every story on your channel. Until next time. Stay sharp, stay vigilant.